The apartment smelled like rain wet and fresh as if the storm had left its mark behind. Thunder rolled over Boston, and the air felt heavy inside the small space wherein I lived. He was lying on the couch, worn down by his illness, and for the first time, he looked less invulnerable. As I helped him settle in, I felt something shift between us, something deeper than friendship. The apartment still carried that rainy scent, fresh, damp. A little earth-like, the storm outside had slipped through the cracks and soaked into the walls. It was late March in Boston, and the city was wrapped in a gray blanket of clouds, the kind that made everything feel heavier than it should. Thunder rumbled in the distance, a low growl rolling over the skyline, while rain tapped against the windows as if it were trying to get indoors. The air was thick and warm, clinging to the small space I shared with my best friend and roommate for the past 3 years. The place wasn't much, just a cramped living room, a kitchen barely big enough for one person, and 2 tiny bedrooms, but it was ours, and most days, that was enough. I pushed the door shut behind me, shaking off my umbrella as water dripped onto the worn hardwood floor. The lights were dim, casting soft shadows across the room, and there he was, sprawled across the couch like he owned it. Which, to be fair, he kinda did. Normally, he'd be up, cracking some dumb joke about my soggy shoes or dragging me into a debate about whether pineapple belonged on pizza. But tonight, he was quiet. Too quiet. His head rested on a throw pillow, one arm flung over his eyes. Even from the doorway, I could see the flush in his cheeks, the way his dark hair stuck to his forehead in damp clumps. He wasn't just tired. He was sick. Rough day at the design desk. I called, keeping my voice light as I kicked off my sneakers. Groaned, shifting just enough to peek at me with one hazel eye, the other still hidden beneath his arm. "More like a rough day being attacked by whatever this is," he muttered, his voice scratchy like sandpaper against wood. He coughed once, then winced, pulling the blanket tighter around his shoulders. "Think I caught something from that client who wouldn't stop sneezing in my face." I smirked, hanging my coat on the hook by the door. "Sounds like you need to start billing for hazard pay." He let out a weak laugh, but it faded into another groan as he flopped back against the cushion. Was 29, a year older than me, and usually the kind of guy who powered through anything late nights sketching logos. Early mornings at the gym, whatever it took. Seeing him like this, all curled up and vulnerable, was strange. Not bad strange, just different. Like catching a glimpse of something I wasn't used to noticing. I crossed the room to the kitchen, flicking on the kettle. "Damn," I asked, already pulling a mug from the cabinet. "Yeah, sure," he mumbled, barely audible over the steady hum of the storm outside. The window above the sink was streaked with rain, dark trails sliding down the glass. For a second, I just stood there, watching them race each other to the bottom. It had been a long day at my own job, coding websites for people who didn't know what they wanted. But coming home too usually made it feel less exhausting. Except tonight, something was off. Not the rain or the thunder, but the way my chest tightened when I glanced back at him. "Still huddled beneath that blanket? You look like you're auditioning for a zombie movie," I said. Leaning against the counter as the kettle began to whistle, he snorted, shifting his arm to glare at me fully this time. "Thanks, James. Real supportive." His tone was dry, but there was a flicker of that usual spark in his eyes, the one that always pulled me into whatever chaos he was cooking up. What's a best friend for, if not brutal honesty? I shot back, pouring hot water over the tea bag. The steam curled up, warm and familiar, and I told myself this was just another night. Just a storm. Just being dramatic about a cold. But as I carried the mug over and set it on the coffee table, he shifted again, trying to sit up and failing halfway. "Man, I feel like garbage," he said, rubbing a hand over his face. His cheeks were still flushed, his hair a mess, and for the first time, I noticed how small he looked against the oversized couch. Not weak, just human. I nudged the tea closer. "Drink that. You'll live." He smirked, but it was softer than usual, almost grateful. "You're stuck with me either way," he said, reaching for the mug with a slightly shaky hand. I laughed, dropping into the armchair across from him. "Lucky me. Thunder rolled again, louder this time, and the room felt smaller somehow, like the storm was pressing in on us. I tried to focus on the sound of the rain, the warmth of the tea, in the air anything but the strange flutter in my stomach. He was just sick. I was just helping. That's what friends do, right? But I sipped the tea and shot me that half smile over the rim. I couldn't shake the feeling that tonight wasn't going to be as simple as I wanted it to be. The rain hadn't let up. If anything, it was louder now, drumming against the windows, like it was trying to drown out the quiet hum of the apartment. Inside, the air felt heavier, thick with the warmth of the tea I'd made and the faint buzz of something I couldn't quite name. Was still on the couch, the mug cradled in his hands, steam curling up around his face. He'd managed a few sips, but his movements were slow and sluggish. Like the cold had drained every ounce of his usual energy. "This is pathetic," he muttered, setting the mug back on the coffee table with a small clink. "I can barely lift my arms." I raised an eyebrow from the armchair, leaning back with my arms crossed. "You're milking this for sympathy, aren't you?" He shot me a look, half glare, half grin. That was pure, even if it was weaker than usual. "Oh yeah, James. Totally. I planned this whole fever and chills thing just to get you to play nurse." His voice was raspy, but the sarcasm was intact, and I couldn't help but laugh. "Well, you're doing a terrible job at it," I said, nodding toward the blanket slipping off his shoulder. "You look like a burrito that gave up halfway," he snorted, tugging the blanket back up. "Rude. I'm a premium burrito. Thank you very much." Then he shifted, trying to sit up straighter, and winced, pressing a hand to his forehead. "Okay, fine. I'm a premium burrito who needs a shower. I feel gross." I tilted my head, watching him struggle for a moment. "You sure you can manage that? You look like you'd collapse halfway to the bathroom," he groaned, flopping back against the cushion. "Don't tempt fate, man. I'm already on thin ice here." Thunder rumbled again, shaking the walls just enough to make the lights flicker. I stood up, stretching my arms over my head. "All right, drama queen. Come on, I'll help you get there. Can't have you passing out and blaming me later." Peeked up at me, one eyebrow raised. "You're serious?" I shrugged, keeping it casual. "What's a best friend for, if not dragging your sorry self around when you're down?" He smirked, but it softened into something else, something quieter. "Fair. Just don't drop me." I crossed the room and offered him a hand, pulling him up as he leaned into me for support. He was heavier than I expected, his arms slung over my shoulders, and I could feel the heat radiating off him, even through his sweatshirt. "You're like a walking furnace," I said, steering him toward the hallway. "Yeah. Well, you're stuck with me," he mumbled, his head dipping slightly as we shuffled along. It wasn't far, just a few steps to the bathroom, but every movement felt deliberate, like the air had thickened around us. Once we got there, I nudged the door open with my foot and flicked on the light. The tiny bathroom was all white tile and chipped paint, the mirror already starting to fog as I turned on the shower. Hot water hissed out, filling the space with steam, and leaned against the sink, catching his breath. "You good?" I asked, stepping back to give him some room. He nodded, but it was slow, uncertain. "Yeah, just give me a sec." He gripped the edge of the sink, his knuckles pale against the porcelain, and I hesitated. Normally I would have left him to it, was stubborn enough to handle himself. But tonight, he looked like he might actually tip over, dude. "You're not inspiring confidence," I said, crossing my arms. He glanced at me, his hazel eyes catching the light, and let out a small laugh. "What, you gonna stand there and supervise?" "Make sure I don't drown." I rolled my eyes, though a grin tugged at my lips. Tempting. "But seriously, you need a hand." He paused like he was weighing it, then shrugged. "Maybe just don't make it weird." "Okay," I snorted. Me. Never. I stepped closer, keeping it light, and helped him tug his sweatshirt over his head. He wobbled a little, steadying himself against me. And I focused on the practical stuff, tossing the shirt into the hamper, making sure he didn't trip over his own feet. The steam was everywhere now, curling around us, softening the edges of the room. "You're on your own for the rest," I said, stepping back toward the door. "I'm not that good of a friend," Laughed, a real one this time, even if it was rough around the edges. Coward, he teased, already turning toward the shower. One hand braced against the wall. I lingered for a second, watching the water hit the tiles, the sound mixing with the rain outside. Yell if you need me, I said, pulling the door halfway shut behind me. Yeah, he called back, his voice muffled by the steam. I walked back to the living room, the floor cool under my socks, and dropped into the armchair again. The storm was still raging, but inside it felt different, like something had shifted, even if I couldn't pin it down. I told myself it was nothing, just helping a friend, but as the shower ran and the thunder rolled, that flutter in my chest was back. And this time, it wasn't so easy to ignore. The shower was still running, a steady hum blending with the rain battering the windows. I sat in the armchair, legs stretched out, staring at the ceiling like it might tell me why my stomach wouldn't settle. The apartment was quiet otherwise, just the storm and the faint clink of pipes as moved around in the bathroom. I'd left the door cracked, half expecting him to call out some sarcastic remark about needing a rescue, but he hadn't, not yet. The tea mug sat empty on the coffee table, its steam long gone. And I wondered if I should have made one for myself, do something to keep my hands busy, my mind distracted. Thunder cracked outside, sharp enough to make me flinch, and I glanced toward the hallway. Steam was slipping out now, a soft haze curling into the living room, carrying the faint scent of shampoo, something woodsy and familiar. It was the same stuff he'd used since we moved in together, back when we'd argued over shelf space and who got the bigger room. 3 years of that. 3 years of him being the loud, messy constant in my life, and somehow tonight felt like it was rewriting all of it. Not in a big, dramatic way, just a quiet shift, like a puzzle piece clicking into place. The water shut off with a squeak, and I straightened, listening. You alive in there? I called, keeping my voice casual. There was a pause. Then voice rough, but warm, floated back. Barely. Give me a sec. I heard the rustle of a towel, the soft thud of him stepping out. I grabbed the spare one I'd left on the armrest, figuring he'd need it. Standing, I walked to the hallway, stopping just outside the bathroom. The door swung open, and there he was, hair dripping, a towel wrapped around his waist, leaning against the frame like he wasn't sure he could make it back to the couch on his own. Wow, I said, tossing him the extra towel. You look like a drowned rat, but at least you're a clean one. He caught it with one hand, smirking as he rubbed it over his head. High praise from you, James. I'll take it. His cheeks were still flushed, but the shower seemed to have helped. His eyes were clearer, brighter even if he moved like every step was a negotiation with gravity. I stepped closer, ready to offer a hand, but he waved me off. I got it. Mostly, he shuffled past me, leaving a trail of damp footprints, and I followed, grabbing a blanket from the couch as he sank back into it. Better? I asked, draping the blanket over his shoulders. He nodded, pulling it tight. Yeah, hot water's a miracle worker. He leaned back, closing his eyes for a second, and the room went quiet, again just the rain, softer now, and the sound of his breathing evening out. I sat on the edge of the coffee table facing him, and for a minute, neither of us said anything. The steam lingered in the air, softening the edges of everything, and I felt that flutter again, sharper this time. Then he opened his eyes and looked straight at me, and the smirk was gone. Hey, he said, his voice low, almost drowned out by the storm. You ever think about us? Like more than this? My breath caught and I froze, every muscle locking up. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just a question. Simple and real, hanging between us like the last of the steam drifting in the hall. I could have laughed it off, turned it into a joke, like we always did. But his eyes were steady, searching, and I couldn't look away. I started and stopped, swallowing hard. The truth was, I had. Late nights when he'd crash on my floor after a movie marathon, mornings when he'd hum off key over coffee, little moments that stayed with me longer than they should have. Yeah, I said finally, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. I've thought about it. His eyebrows lifted slightly, like he hadn't expected that. Then he smiled, not his usual grin, but something softer, warmer. Good, he said, leaning his head back against the cushion, 'cause I have to. My chest tightened, but not in a bad way. It felt like a knot loosening instead of pulling tighter. You're serious? I asked. He nodded, still watching me. Yeah, you're, important. More than just the guy who makes me tea when I'm a mess. He laughed a little, but it was gentle, and I felt my own smile tug at my lips. You're a mess, a lot, he said. He chuckled, the sound easing the tension in the air. True. Lucky I've got you. I shifted, resting my elbows on my knees, and really looked at him, the wet hair stuck to his forehead. The way the blanket bunched around his shoulders, the quiet spark in his eyes. You do, I said, and it felt bigger than it sounded. Like a promise I hadn't planned to make. He didn't say anything back, just nodded again, and the rain tapped against the windows. Like it was keeping time. The storm was still there, but in here it felt warm, safe. Even like maybe this was where we'd always been heading. And we just needed a rainy night to figure it out. By morning, the rain had softened. No longer a pounding roar, just a gentle patter against the windows. Sunlight crept through the blinds, thin and pale, painting stripes across the living room floor. I woke up in the armchair, my neck stiff from sleeping at a weird angle, a throw pillow wedged under my head. The apartment was quiet, too quiet after last night's storm. For a second, I just sat there blinking at the ceiling, trying to piece together how I felt. Everything should have been different, right? After what I said back. But the room looked the same, the coffee table cluttered with mugs, a blanket half draped over the couch, the faint smell of rain still lingering in the air. I rubbed my eyes and glanced at the couch, empty. The blanket was folded. Well, more like a lumpy pile and was gone. My stomach flipped, and I wasn't sure if it was relief or something else. Maybe he'd crashed in his room after the shower. Or maybe he was already pretending last night hadn't happened. I wasn't sure which one I wanted. Standing, I stretched, my socks silent on the hardwood as I shuffled toward the kitchen. That's when I heard it, the soft clink of a spoon against ceramic, the low hum of the kettle. Was there, barefoot on the cold tile, pouring coffee into a mug like it was any other day. Morning, he said without looking up, his voice still a little scratchy but steadier than last night. He was wearing a faded t-shirt and sweats, his hair a mess from sleep. And he moved like the cold hadn't quite let go of him yet. Morning, I echoed. Leaning against the counter, he glanced at me, then just a quick flick of his hazel eyes and smirked. You look like you slept in a pretzel shape, I snorted, running a hand through my hair. Thanks to you and your couch-hogging skills. He shrugged, sliding the coffee toward me. Consider it payback for the tea. I took the mug, the warmth seeping into my hands, and for a minute we just stood there, sipping in silence. It wasn't awkward. Not exactly. Jess knew. Like we were testing the air between us. Last night replayed in my head his question. My answer. The way it felt like a door opening instead of closing. I kept waiting for the panic to hit. The moment where I'd start overthinking everything's is what it meant. What other people might think. I'd spent years keeping things simple with, sticking to the best friend script, but now there was a maybe I couldn't shake. It wasn't as scary as I'd expected. So, he said, breaking the quiet as he leaned against the counter opposite me. You gonna start avoiding me now? I blinked, caught off guard, and he grinned, that same old grin, sharp and teasing. What? I asked, setting my mug down. He shrugged, swirling his coffee like it was no big deal. The whole, oh no, we talked about feelings, better hide forever thing. I know how your brain works, James. I rolled my eyes, but he wasn't wrong. My mind was already spinning, wondering if this changed everything, if it would be weird now. If people at work or my family would ever get it. Not that I'd told them anything yet, it's not like that, I said, crossing my arms. I'm not avoiding you. I'm standing here, aren't I? He tilted his head, studying me. True, but you've got that look like you're about to bolt or write a pros and cons list in your head. I had to laugh because, yeah, that sounded like me. Maybe I am. Pro, you make decent coffee. Con, you're a pain when you're sick. He laughed, loud and real, and it cut through the haze in my chest like sunlight. Fair. I'll take it. The kettle clicked off, and he turned to pour himself more, his movements slow but relaxed. I watched him the way he rubbed his neck like he always did when he was tired, the way his t-shirt hung loose on his shoulders. He was still the guy who dragged me out for midnight diner runs and argued about who'd win in a zombie apocalypse. But now he was more too, and I wasn't sure what to do with that yet. You feeling better? I asked, nodding toward him. He glanced back and nodded. Yeah, not 100%, but I'll live. Thanks to you. Shrugged, brushing it off. Just doing my job. He smirked, but it softened as he looked at me. You're good at it, you know? Taking care of people? My throat tightened, and I looked down at my coffee, swirling it just to have something to do. Only when they're worth it, I said. When I glanced up, he was still watching me. That warm look in his eyes I'd seen the night before. Good to know, he said quietly. The room felt smaller again. Not heavy, just close, like we were sharing something without needing to say it out loud. The rain tapped faintly outside, and I took another sip, letting the warmth settle me. Maybe this was complicated. Maybe it would take time to figure out, but as nudged my arm with his elbow, grinning like nothing had changed, I thought maybe it didn't have to be hard. Not yet. Not with him. The days after that rainy night slipped by like they always did, but something had settled between us, something good. The storm had moved on, leaving Boston with crisp air and puddles that reflected the sky. Inside our little apartment, life slipped back into its usual rhythm, or at least it tried to. Was up and moving again, his cold fading into a memory. And I was back to my coding deadlines, the glow of my laptop screen a constant companion. But it wasn't the same. Not really. Not in the way he flopped onto the couch beside me now, closer than before, or how he'd catch my eye over breakfast and grin like we were in on a secret. It was a Thursday evening, maybe a week later, when I felt it click. The sun was dipping low, painting the living room in soft gold, and was sprawled across the couch, one leg dangling off the armrest, scrolling through his phone. You up for a walk? He asked, not looking up. I glanced over from the kitchen where I was rinsing a mug. It's going to rain again, I said, nodding toward the window. Dark clouds were rolling in, the kind that promised a quick soak. He shrugged, tossing his phone onto the cushion. So, we've got umbrellas. Live a little, James. I smirked, drying my hands on a towel. Says the guy who was a human blanket burrito a week ago. He laughed, sitting up. Exactly. I've earned this. Come on, I need air. There was that spark in his eyes again, the one that always dragged me along, whether I wanted to or not. Fine, I said, grabbing my jacket. But if I get sick, you're making the tea this time.
He grinned,
hopping up to pull on his sneakers. Deal. We stepped outside just as the first drops started, light and scattered, tapping against the sidewalk. Popped open his umbrella, holding it high enough for both of us, and we walked side by side, the city buzzing around us. Cars splashing through puddles, people ducking into shops. See? He said, nudging my shoulder. Not so bad. I rolled my eyes but didn't pull away, the warmth of his arm brushing mine, cutting through the chill. You're just lucky it's not a downpour yet, I said, and he chuckled. The sound mixing with the rain. We didn't talk much at first. Just wandered down familiar streets past the deli where we'd argued over sandwich orders. The park where he'd once bet me he could climb a tree in one try. It was easy, like always, but there was something new in it too. A quiet understanding that didn't need words. I thought about that night, the way he'd asked about us, the way I'd answered. I'd spent so long keeping things simple, safe. Now, I wondered why I'd ever thought I had to stay that way. You're quiet, he said after a while, glancing at me as we paused under a streetlight. Rain glistened on the umbrella, dripping from the edges. Just thinking, I said. Eh? Shoving my hands into my pockets. He tilted his head, curious. About what? I hesitated, then shrugged. You, us. How it's different now. His grin softened, and he nodded like he'd been waiting for me to say it. Yeah, different's not bad though, right? I met his eyes steady and warm and shook my head. No, not bad at all. The rain picked up then, a steady drizzle that sent us ducking into a coffee shop down the block. We grabbed a table by the window, 2 steaming cups between us, and watched the world blur outside. You know, he said, stirring sugar into his coffee. I wasn't sure you'd be cool with this. He hesitated. The whole more than friends thing. I raised an eyebrow, sipping mine. What? You thought I'd run screaming? He laughed, leaning back. Maybe you're not exactly Mr. Spontaneous, I smirked. And you're not exactly subtle. Guess we balance each other out. He nodded, his smile easy, and we sat there trading dumb jokes about the barista's handwriting on our cups, about how the rain made everything look like a movie. It wasn't some big dramatic moment. No declarations, no heavy promises, just us, laughing over coffee while the storm tapped against the glass. But it was enough. More than enough later, back home, we stood on the balcony, the rain reduced to a faint drizzle, leaned against the railing, coffee still in hand, and I stood beside him. Close enough that our shoulders touched. This is good, he said. Almost to himself, I nodded, feeling the truth of it settle in my chest. Yeah, it is. The city stretched out below us, lights flickering through the wet haze, and I realized I didn't care what anyone else might think. Not work, not family, not the rest of the world. This was ours, and that was all that mattered. We stayed there, watching the rain, and I knew we'd figure it out one step at a time. Asterisk.